Honey found in Egyptian tombs, sealed for over 3,000 years, was still perfectly edible when archaeologists cracked them open. This is the only food on Earth that literally never expires. 3,000 years. Not ancient, not artificially preserved. Just honey, sitting in the dark, waiting. But here is what nobody tells you. There is one property inside every drop of real honey that pharmaceutical companies have been desperately trying to replicate in a lab since the 1960s, and they still cannot do it. By the end of this video, you will understand exactly what makes honey biologically immortal, and why ancient Egyptians were not just burying it as a snack. What you are about to learn will change how you see that jar sitting in your kitchen, because honey's secret is stranger and far more powerful than anything you have ever been taught. The Egyptian vaults. In 1922, when Howard Carter unsealed the tomb of Tutankhamun, his team discovered clay parts filled with honey. Honey that had been sitting in the desert heat, in complete darkness, for over 3,000 years. And when they tested it, it was still edible, still sweet, still honey. This was not a one-time discovery. Archaeological digs across Egypt have turned up honey dating back as far as 5,500 years. In the ancient Georgian region near modern Tbilisi, researchers found honey residue inside clay parts from 5,000 years before Christ. Think carefully about what that means. When the person who made that honey was alive, the Egyptian pyramids had not yet been built. The civilization that sealed that jar had crumbled entirely to dust. The bees that made it had long since died. But the honey just kept going. Every other food surrenders to time. Honey simply refuses. Milk spoils in days. Bread goes stale in hours. Even canned goods stamped with expiration dates eventually fail. But honey sits in a sealed tomb for 3 millennia and emerges unchanged. This is not mythology. This is chemistry. And the first reason honey refuses to die is so simple it might frustrate you. But the next fact, it makes this discovery look like a warm-up. The moisture code. Stop and think about this for a second. Every organism on Earth, every bacterium, every fungus, every mold, needs one fundamental thing above all else to survive and reproduce. Water. That is it. Remove the available water, and life simply cannot happen. And here is where honey performs its first impossible trick. Fresh, raw honey contains less than 17% water by weight. Scientists measure something called water activity, a scale from 0 to 1 describing how biologically available the water in a substance actually is. Pure water scores 1, 0. Most bacteria require at least 0, 91 to function and reproduce. Honey sits at approximately 0, 6. That is not just dry. That is a hostile, uninhabitable wasteland for any microorganism. Bacteria cannot reproduce, cannot metabolize, cannot even survive without their own cells dehydrating and collapsing inward. Bees achieve this by fanning developing nectar with their wings inside the hive, literally evaporating excess water until the concentration drops below that critical 17% threshold. They are engineering a food that nothing in nature can consume or destroy. If this science of biological immortality is already blowing your mind, hit like and subscribe, because the next facts are even crazier. Seriously, we are just getting started. And what I am about to tell you about honey's acidity, that is where this gets truly wild. The acid fortress. But what if honey somehow absorbed moisture from the air around it? What if it got wet? Wouldn't that break the spell and let bacteria in? This is where honey's second weapon comes in, and it is an absolute chemical fortress. Honey is acidic, surprisingly almost aggressively acidic. Its pH typically sits between 3, 2 and 4, 5. To put that in perspective, vinegar, the substance used to preserve pickles for centuries, has a pH of around 2, 4 to 3. 4. Honey operates in that same lethal neighborhood. Most bacteria simply cannot survive in environments more acidic than a pH of 4, 6, which means even if bacteria somehow survive the moisture problem, the acid destroys them anyway. Acid kills everything. This acidity comes primarily from gluconic acid, produced when bees inject their own enzymes into the nectar during production. Bees are not just collecting sweetness. They are actively manufacturing an acid environment that bacteria cannot survive. As Epictetus once observed about hidden power in ordinary things, what concerns me is not the way things are, but rather the way people think things are. Nobody looks at honey and thinks chemical warfare, but every drop of honey is waging a silent war against decay. And there is a third weapon, one that makes moisture and acid look like minor defenses. To understand it, you first need to know exactly how honey is actually made. And that process is stranger than anything you would expect. The bee alchemy. Now, what I am about to tell you sounds almost too elegant to be real, but it has been scientifically verified in extraordinary detail. When a honeybee collects nectar from a flower, that nectar is roughly 70 to 80% water. It is thin, sugary liquid, completely vulnerable to bacterial growth within hours. A bee cannot simply carry wet nectar back to the hive and call it honey. It has to transform it at a molecular level. Inside the hive, worker bees pass the nectar mouth to mouth in a process called trophallaxis. Each transfer adds enzymes secreted from the bee's own hypopharyngeal glands, biological factories built directly inside the bee's head. These enzymes are simultaneously doing two critical things. First, they break down complex sucrose into simpler glucose and fructose, creating far more osmotic pressure against any microbial invader. Second, and this is the part the whole story hinges on, they begin producing honey's most powerful and secret weapon. Meanwhile, other bees fan the developing mixture with their wings, evaporating water down below that critical threshold. When complete, they seal everything with beeswax, airtight and watertight. Bees have been engineering the perfect food for 50 million years, and that secret weapon built into the process through their own enzymes, that comes next, and nobody, absolutely nobody, saw it coming. The sugar armor. Here is where the science gets brutal. Forget what you think you know about sugar being merely sweet. In honey, sugar is not just food. It is a weapon of ruthless biological precision. Honey is a supersaturated sugar solution, meaning it contains far more dissolved sugar than water could normally hold in a stable equilibrium. This creates what scientists call osmotic pressure. Imagine a bacterium landing on the surface of honey. The moment it makes contact, something merciless begins. The sugar concentration outside the bacterium's cell wall is dramatically higher than inside. Water rushes out of the bacterial cell, through its own membrane, desperately attempting to equalize the pressure. The bacterium does not get eaten. It does not get poisoned. It shrivels, dehydrates from the inside out, and dies. This process is called plasmolysis, and it is absolutely ruthless. The same principle is why salt has been used for thousands of years to preserve meat and fish. But honey performs this osmotic attack with far more precision, simultaneously targeting bacteria, fungi, and yeast without a shred of mercy. Honey does not preserve itself by accident. It preserves itself by design. Nature engineered a food so biologically hostile to decay that time literally cannot gain a foothold. But there is still one more weapon, the secret one. The property pharmaceutical companies have been desperately chasing since the 1960s, and this changes everything. Hydrogen Guardian. Remember the open question from the very beginning. The one property pharmaceutical companies have been trying to replicate since the 1960s and still cannot. Here is where we finally see it. When bees add an enzyme called glucose oxidase to the nectar during production, something chemically extraordinary happens. That enzyme slowly converts glucose into two things simultaneously: gluconic acid, which drives the pH even lower, and hydrogen peroxide. Hydrogen peroxide, self-made. Yes, honey produces its own hydrogen peroxide, the exact compound used in hospitals to disinfect wounds and surgical equipment. Slowly, continuously, in microscopic but biologically significant amounts. But here is what makes this property truly revolutionary. When honey is diluted, when it absorbs moisture from a wound or from the surrounding environment, the glucose oxidase enzyme becomes more active. It releases more hydrogen peroxide. The exact moment honey encounters conditions that could allow bacteria to begin growing, it automatically amplifies the very weapon that kills them. It is a self-activating, dynamically responsive antimicrobial system unlike anything else in nature. As Alexander Fleming, the discoverer of penicillin, once observed, one sometimes finds what one is not looking for. Researchers studying honey stumbled onto something equally profound. A living biological system that switches itself on precisely when threatened. No synthetic compound on Earth can self-activate the way honey does, and what this means for medicine, and what ancient civilizations already knew. That changes everything you think you understand. Fake honey crisis. Now forget everything I just said for a moment, because not all honey is the same. And what I am about to tell you might genuinely make you angry. A study published by Food Safety News found that over 75% of honey sold in American grocery stores has been ultra-filtered, a processing method that strips all pollen from the product. Without pollen, there is no way to trace where the honey came from, how it was processed, or what was added to it. And here is why that matters enormously. Genuine, raw honey with moisture content below 17%, with its full enzyme system intact, with its natural antimicrobial properties fully functioning, that honey lasts forever. That is the honey archaeologists found in sealed Egyptian tombs. But highly processed honey, heated above 40 degrees Celsius, diluted with water, or adulterated with corn syrup or rice syrup. That honey is a fundamentally different substance. It expires. Heating destroys the glucose oxidase enzyme instantly. It eliminates self-activating hydrogen peroxide production. It collapses the entire antimicrobial system. What remains is essentially flavored sugar water. And sugar water absolutely goes bad. When people say honey never expires, they mean real, raw, properly stored honey. And most people have likely never tasted real honey in their entire lives. But what real honey has been used for across 6,000 years of human history? What our ancestors discovered about its extraordinary power? That is where the story becomes truly insane. Ancient medicine. Let me pause here, because this next part fundamentally changes the entire picture. Ancient Egyptians were not just eating honey. They were prescribing it as medicine across a staggering range of conditions. The Ebers Papyrus, one of the oldest medical documents ever discovered, dating to approximately 1550 BC, contains over 900 medical prescriptions, and honey appears in more than 500 of them. 500 out of 900. They used it for eye infections, open skin wounds, intestinal disorders, severe burns, and post-surgical dressings. They had no knowledge of glucose oxidase, osmotic pressure, or hydrogen peroxide. They were operating on thousands of years of accumulated observation, and they were scientifically correct. Every great civilization, independently, discovered the same remedy. Sumerians, ancient Greeks, Romans, and Ayurvedic practitioners in India. Across vastly different cultures with no direct communication, honey emerged simultaneously as medicine. Greek athletes consumed it to accelerate physical recovery. Roman soldiers carried it specifically to pack infected battlefield wounds. In World War I, before modern antibiotics existed, military surgeons applied manuka honey to gangrenous, infected wounds when every other treatment had failed. The art of healing comes from nature, not from the physician. The physician was simply wise enough to recognize what nature had already engineered over millions of years. But what honey's full power looks like when tested against the deadliest bacteria known to 21st century medicine, that is the most shocking part of this entire video. And it is coming next. The eternal proof. If the Egyptian tombs impressed you, you are absolutely not ready for this. Scientists studying honey's antimicrobial properties have discovered something that borders on biologically impossible. Certain varieties, particularly manuka honey from New Zealand, have been clinically demonstrated to kill over 60 distinct species of bacteria, including MRSA, methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus, the antibiotic-resistant superbug responsible for thousands of deaths annually in hospitals worldwide, killed by honey. MRSA has evolved specifically to resist our most powerful synthetic antibiotics. It has outmaneuvered pharmaceutical research for decades, but it cannot evolve resistance to honey. The reason is elegant and brutal. Honey does not attack with one mechanism. It attacks with 5 simultaneously. Osmotic pressure, acidic pH, hydrogen peroxide production, devastatingly low water activity, and additional antimicrobial compounds like methylglyoxal found specifically in manuka varieties. Bacteria cannot develop resistance to 5 different simultaneous chemical attacks from 5 different directions. Evolution simply cannot operate fast enough. 5 weapons, 0 resistance. In 2019, the World Health Organization listed antibiotic resistance as one of the 10 greatest threats to global health. Researchers at universities from Cardiff to Sydney are now seriously investigating honey-based clinical treatments as a viable answer to this mounting crisis. The oldest food on Earth might solve medicine's newest crisis. Send this to someone who still thinks honey is just a sweetener. They will not believe you. Which fact in this video shocked you the most? Comment the number below. I will pin the best response. Because what comes next finally resolves the question I raised at the very beginning. The immortal code. So here is the answer pharmaceutical companies have been chasing since the 1960s and still cannot fully replicate in a laboratory. It is not the hydrogen peroxide alone. It is not the pH alone. It is not the osmotic pressure alone. It is all 5 mechanisms operating simultaneously in a dynamic, self-regulating, responsive system. When moisture increases, glucose oxidase activates to produce more hydrogen peroxide. When bacteria attempt to adapt to the acid, osmotic pressure dehydrates them before resistance can form. When water activity rises slightly, the sugar concentration compensates. When one line of defense is stressed, the others intensify. Honey does not just resist decay. It actively fights it from every direction at once. No single antibiotic can replicate that dynamic. No synthetic preservative on Earth operates with that simultaneous, multi-front biological responsiveness. Bees evolved this extraordinary system not to create food for humans, but to protect their colonies' only winter fuel source across months with no flowers in bloom. They solved the problem of eternal, decay-proof preservation 50 million years before we even understood what bacteria were. Eternal, perfect, unstoppable. Ancient Egyptians buried honey with their pharaohs because they believed it literally bridged the living and the immortal divine. In a deeply scientific, molecular sense, they were not entirely wrong. If you made it this far, comment eternal gold below, because you now understand something that most people walking past that grocery store shelf will never know. The truth is stranger than anything you could make up. 3,000 years from now, if someone finds a properly sealed jar of raw honey from today, it will still be edible. Not because of magic, not because of ancient mystery, because of 5 simultaneous molecular mechanisms that 50 million years of evolution built into a single food. Mechanisms that no laboratory on Earth has yet been able to fully replicate or synthesize. The most eternal thing on Earth was engineered by an insect the size of your thumbnail. We spend billions of dollars every year developing pharmaceutical drugs that bacteria eventually learn to circumvent. And the answer? A multi-directional, self-regulating, dynamically responsive antimicrobial system that defeats resistance by attacking from 5 angles simultaneously. Has been sitting quietly inside beehives since long before the first human civilization was built. There is something genuinely humbling about that. Something that makes you wonder how many other extraordinary solutions nature has already perfected, that we are too busy looking forward to notice sitting right behind us. In all things of nature, there is something of the marvelous. Look closer always. If you made it to the end and your perspective on that kitchen jar has permanently shifted, comment eternal gold below to prove it. You are now among the few who actually understand what honey is. The truth is stranger than anything you could make up. If your brain is as blown as mine right now, hit subscribe, because next time it gets even crazier.